Welcome, everyone, again to another episode of the SERMAPod. This is the podcast for the Sports and Entertainment Risk Management Alliance. I am the founder and CEO of SERMA, also the host of the SERMAPod, Rich Lenkov, and we're very proud and humbled to welcome today a very esteemed guest discussing a very important issue, Katherine Starr. Katherine is a two-time Olympian. She is founder of Safe for Athletes, which is a nonprofit dedicated to addressing abuse in sport. She is an expert witness for coach-athlete sexual abuse, has opined on record-setting settlements. She is also the author of the recently released book, I should say, which is entitled Rescue Me, a Powerful Memoir by an Olympian. She has been heard on lots of media outlets, everything from ESPN to NBC Sports to many others. We're very honored to have Katherine on the show. Katherine, welcome to the SERMAPod.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it and look forward to our conversation.
So in the news in only the last few weeks has been the Mel Tucker, who was terminated as Michigan State head football coach in the wake of some allegations that he made sexually suggestive comments and also masturbated while on the phone with a woman who the university had hired, ironically, to come in and train the program on dealing with sexual assault and sexual harassment. He's been fired. The Title IX hearing into his termination, into these allegations, will take place next week. He has since, most recently, fired off a letter through his attorneys predictably denying his guilt in this incident. He has called it a completely consensual event that only lasted 36 minutes, I believe he said, and was entirely consensual. He also questions whether this is a proper Title IX investigation. In addition to that, a lot of us have heard of the story involving the firing of the coach of the women's Spanish soccer team, George Vilda, who was fired after he kissed, which is uncontroverted, one of his teammates. In addition, we have recently seen a lawsuit filed by some cheerleaders in the Northwestern program who have alleged that Northwestern University is guilty of turning a blind eye over the course of many years to sexual abuse, more sexual harassment that the cheerleaders have had to endure by fans and athletes. That, of course, comes in the wake of the bigger story involving Northwestern, or another story involving Northwestern, which is along the same lines, which is the termination of their head football coach, Pat Fitzgerald, at the beginning of the season, prior to the start of the college season, as a result of hazing and bullying allegations, many of which involved allegations of sexual abuse in the locker room and adjacent to the football program. Again, the allegations there being that the university was aware of this and didn't do anything to remedy it. So, Katherine, I'll ask you the first question. What is the common thread among these stories? And these are only, as you know, a sampling of many similar situations that we're seeing in sports. But what's the common thread among these stories?
Well, I mean, you have institutions, behind it, right? And so you have your athletes who are believing they're walking into an environment that they're not going to be harmed. And whether it's the Spanish national team or if it's within the collegiate environment. And it is certainly it is certainly well documented at this point, the need for policies and procedures to be in place. And that's in education, prevention, all that. And so for me, when I see these stories like just fired, it's like one hasn't left the headlines until a new story comes in. I mean, you just said 3, and that's what in the last, month or so. And we're not learning, right? We're not learning. And from our experiences, we're not putting in an education program, and prevention is obviously non-existent. And the other element to it, which I find is a real weakness, having worked on many cases, is that there isn't this bystander training. So you have a lot of compliance. You have a lot of people who are they'll say, well, we didn't know how to talk to, we didn't know what to say. Like there's a lot of information that was already there that was never responded to. So I find that, there's a model that you look at. It's called the Helen Armstrong model. And it's the role of the bystanders with the victim and with the abuser. In this case, you have the institution and then all the people within the institution that have contributed to the outcome of the victim. And so you look at the strength of that model to see, where your weaknesses are within an institution. And what I find is it always sits with what the actions of the bystander, the assistant coaches, the administrative staff, and what have you. And then there's the lack of push the authority, push the decision maker over to another group. And, and that's kind of where I feel like there's been a huge dependence, and we probably can walk in this next level of knowing that there's a Title IX office that it'll just get reported, right? So the actions aren't changing. There's just this knowledge that we have an office to handle that.
Yeah, I want to get into the Title IX implications in a moment. And again, Mel Tucker, the former head coach of the men's Michigan State football team, has argued that this is not even a Title IX situation. But, talk to us from your experience working with victims of all forms of abuse in sports, the mindset of someone like Brenda Tracy, who is the, alleged victim, I suppose, at this point in the Mel Tucker situation, who, again, was the victim herself in previous years of a gang rape, who was hired by the university, as she was by other universities, to come in and train athletes and other members of the athletic department on how to avoid those kind of situations. Someone who's already been the victim of a gang rape, which is among the most horrific things anyone would think of enduring, to also be then the victim of this alleged abuse, and then to have it compounded by the fact that the university, while they did terminate Mel Tucker, they haven't made any decisions yet. That seems to be putting the victim through the mill over and over again, and that obviously has to be just compounding the degree of loss and abuse that they've already undergone.
Well, here's kind of the thing with this situation is that you have someone who's like saying, hey, look, here's my experience, here's what, here's the behaviors that contributed to it. And these are like the behaviors that are unacceptable in this environment. And then you have someone who's head of this group who is exhibiting these types of behaviors. You're like presented with, with this, and you have an institution who's paying somebody for this individual. Like that's their, like the influence and the control and the power dynamics exist within this environment. And, and so one has to understand, and I think if you go through training, you can't consent. There is no ability to consent to this. So regardless if, that's the whole point of like coach-athlete relationships and how I even got into doing the work that I do, is that unless it was like sort of a violent thing that happened in the back alley, then we understood that. Like that was like a clearly understood, you were raped, you were abused. But when it's this manipulation, breakdown of your will, breakdown of your ability to say no, and here you are in this position, and the only way you can dress is when you get out of it, right? And that's like sort of the repeated situation that I find in these situations, is that we are in a position, we have the model's in place, but the model is ineffective, right? And it can only be as good as the people who are within the model, like the administrators that are sending the information there. And, and you have, in this particular case, you have a head coach who, if one of his players or one of his staff would have done that, is that a reportable event to Title IX, right? So if you are in a position to go, well, I do that, how would you then therefore trickle that down to go, hey, I need to report that for my staff? So who knows what else within the university is getting through the cracks because people aren't seeing what is considered harm and what is considered harassment.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. And again, you just question if the head of the most lucrative athletic program at Michigan State felt comfortable enough talking this way and acting this way in front of a vendor that they hired specifically to deal with this kind of behavior. What else was going on that we're not aware of, right? I mean, you have to sort of wonder if this came to light, what hasn't yet come to light?
Yeah, say where there's smoke, there's fire. And so in this situation, I feel like there's like the harm. You have a coach who's freely has no belief that there's any repercussions, right? It's like Title IX doesn't apply to the head coach. That just applies to, like this ideology, and it puts you in a position of being untouchable. It puts you in this position of, no, this applies to everybody. Everybody on that campus, this applies to. And then the administrators, the sports supervisors, the athletic director, everybody who's responsible for the oversight of these head coaches, like, what is their role? And that's where the bystander is. It's like, what did you know about your coach's behavior? Like, what did you witness and not see? What did you see? Like, this behavior usually happens out in plain sight. Like whether it's comments, like you have the situation with the cheerleaders. If you have fans and if you have players, we're not talking this happened on the internet. This is like present and within an environment where there's witnesses. And so then you're like, well, why didn't people take action? Right? Are your systems broken down? Like, where is it within this environment that's allowing this abuse to continue to flourish in our universities? We've had many markers in our media to raise red flags, whether it be Larry Nassar, whether it's the Me Too movement. Like there's so many markers for universities to, especially Michigan State, to have relooked at how they train and educate and prevent abuse within their environment.
So in the wake of Nassar, I mean, do you think that Michigan State could have handled this one differently? I mean, they certainly acted relatively swiftly in first suspending, but then pretty quickly firing Tucker. How do you think they and other universities should handle these allegations differently? Or do you think they did a pretty good job on this in this one?
Well, I think how they handled the situation is from the expedited. I don't know how much quicker you could have gone through that. Maybe a day, 2 days. I mean, there wasn't seem to be, from what I've read, from awareness to, resolution. But that's less the issue of how they responded in the response to it. The issue is how was it allowed? Right. So what systems weren't in place that allowed this to even get to this point?
Well, and to address that really excellent question, and something we've talked about a lot here in our content in SERMA, is it's all tied in ultimately to the bottom line, right? I mean, college athletics is a bigger business today than it was even a year ago, in the wake of some of the TV deals, in the wake of the conferences getting together, in the wake of name, image, and likeness deals. So there's more money today than there has ever been. And someone like Mel Tucker, who signed one of the most lucrative contracts in college athletics history, is really an industry in and of himself, right? And such a profit center, and generating such notoriety and resources for the university, that it makes it difficult to put a stop to this kind of behavior. And that, I think, incentivizes universities to perhaps turn a blind eye or not be as aggressive in dealing with these allegations as they would otherwise be, say, if this was a water polo coach or a non-income generating coach of a lesser degree than Mel Tucker.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'd like to see more accountability in contracts, around these things. That would certainly change, because you talk about, the most lucrative deal. Well, how do you correct behavior, right? In this particular case, is, education and awareness. It's like, okay, I know, but if you fire me, you still got to pay out X amount of millions of dollars regardless, right? So, how do you capture this whole environment? Like, how do you prevent that? And then how do you make sure that everybody below you that you're reporting into also knows that, is also adhering to all of the Title IX programs and educations that every university has. So, I think a huge reform and overhaul, and if there isn't the consequence to support it, you're not going to get a significant change in behavior.
Katherine, with the few minutes we've got left, I want to talk to you a little bit more about Safe for Athletes, because I know the excellent work that this organization is doing, more at the ground level in trying to educate, younger student athletes and coaches who are just coming up. What are some of the tools that you try to impart on the younger generation to educate them on how to prevent these kind of abuses from happening in the first place?
So we provide like an out of box program for the local level youth sports. And Say Sport is, they handle all allegations within, the Olympic movement. So Say for Athletes sort of plugs into Say Sport. So we help them generate any allegations that go that way. But we create, like, our coaches have a code of conduct. They have, requirements that they have to adhere to. We educate the parents and we educate the families and the athletes about, how to speak up. And then we train and have an athlete welfare advocate part of their program. And what I have found is every time we've implemented Safe for Athletes, it's like, oh, we have no problems here. Right. And I'm like, okay, well, I've trained everybody. Everybody knows how to speak up. Everybody knows, that what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Give it 3 to 6 months, boom, it rises to the top. And so, and it's not you don't want to have shame about that. That's the stuff we want to get out, right? So if you have a coach that's causing harm, and it's a program that really addresses all aspects of this, whether it's bullying, abuse, or what have you. So I highly recommend. Our policies are free on the site. If you need our assistance, give us a call. But we highly recommend that program in every youth sports environment at the local level to address these issues.
That's Katherine Starr, two-time Olympian, founder of Safe for Athletes, which is, again, a nonprofit dedicated to addressing abuse in sports. All of this can be found at katherinestarr.com, and also check out her excellent book, which is titled Rescue Me, A Powerful Memoir by an Olympian. Katherine, thank you so much for coming on to discuss this very important topic. And please come back and keep us posted as these stories continue to, unfortunately, be in the news.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you having this conversation. So it's always insightful.
Thank you very much.